What's up, Willowbrook? Today we're in Mark chapter 13, and there's so much in this chapter, so we're going to get started. Starting in verse 1, Jesus is leaving the temple with his disciples, and one of the disciples says, "Look, what massive stones, what magnificent buildings." They're admiring the temple. Then Jesus goes on to say, "Do you see all these great buildings? Not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down." So Jesus is saying one day the temple will be destroyed. So the disciples, a few of them ask Jesus, when will this happen? And what are some signs we can be looking towards to know this is about to happen? So Jesus begins to talk about this. Starting in verse 5 to verse 13, Jesus gives them these signs to look for: wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes, and he talks about how they'll be persecuted. And he says these are things to be looking for to know what's about to happen. But then starting in verse 14, Jesus' focus shifts beyond the destruction of the temple, and he looks to the end times, the end of the world, what we like to call the tribulation. We read about this in more detail in the book of Revelation. And he describes it just a little bit here and describes it as a terrible thing. Even in verse 20, it says, if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would survive. So this is going to be a terrible thing to live through, a terrible thing to go through. And this goes on, he talks about it until about verse 23. And so then he tells them, be on guard. He's told them everything ahead of time. And then it switches, and he goes from talking about the end times, the tribulation, and then he begins to talk about his return and how he'll be seen coming on the clouds, which is from Daniel 7:13. But then he says something else right after. He says, no one knows when this is going to happen except the Father. So he tells the disciples, and he tells us today to keep watch, to be alert. So with so much happening in this chapter, what is Jesus actually trying to tell us? Because there's a lot going on. Well, I think this chapter is less concerned about details about the future, and I think it's more concerned with us just being faithful in the present. I think that Jesus knows that when we start looking at all these details about end times and what's to come, all these signs, and it can be very easy for us to start focusing on the future and to neglect what we're called to do in the present. And also, if you look through this chapter, Jesus mentions multiple times that we're supposed to be alert. We're supposed to keep watch. Now, what are we supposed to keep watch for? I think it's to be watchful that we're not deceived. As we're waiting for all these things to take place, as we're waiting for his return, Jesus wants to be sure that we aren't deceived, that we're not led astray from the faith. So let me encourage you today, as we hear about things in the news and maybe things start to look more and more like this chapter and things to come. Don't be afraid. Don't try to run away, but stay faithful to what God has called you to do. Let's keep watch. Let's be ready for his return, but let's stay faithful in the present as we wait. God bless you.